which I'm kind of glad that we hadn't finished up this book yet, because I just wanted to kind of round things off here and bring it to completion. So we continued talking about the sacrifices, right? We talked basically about what the sacrifices were for and kind of how the sacrificial system worked, okay? And it's and one thing for you to think about is, have you ever tried to count up all the sins that you've committed during a week or a day or anything like that? It's okay if you haven't. I don't even really know if you and I can truly count up the amount of sins that we commit, because we're accountable for our thoughts and stuff like that too, and attitudes and inclinations and desires. So it's not just the actions that we do or the words that we say, or Leviticus even has things like, in reading the book of Leviticus, did it kind of make, and I don't mean like sleepy, but when I read the book of Leviticus, it makes me tired, in the sense that thinking about all that you would have to do to purify yourself from just even uncleanness, right? There are things in there that are natural things. They're not sin, they're not bad, but if you became unclean, you touched something that was unclean, your body had like a scab on it that secreted, juice or blood or whatever, you're unclean, and then it says unclean until evening, or sometimes you have a week of being unclean, and everything you sit on, every bed you lay on is unclean, and everybody who touches that bed or couch.
Reporter?
Yeah.
Could you finish dual attendance?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I finished dual attendance because a lot of people are in PSAT. Okay, hang on just a second, guys. So, did you say Vivian is not here?
I don't think so.
I did not see her today.
Okay, they marked her. I think everybody else is here. That's the problem with this, is it's like, how would I know who's here or not, right? Because somebody could theoretically be sick, but I wouldn't know if they're at the PSAT or if they're not here, which isn't a problem for you guys, but it is a problem if we did like a fire drill or something, so it's like, okay, is the person on campus or not? Okay, what's up?
It was kind of...
Oh, was it still showing it on there?
Evan was trying to
airplay.
Oh, he was? Oh, well.
Well, it was
Not
probably
successfully.
somebody else that
It's
took
probably
his
his
iPad and
iPad,
his
yeah.
chemistry.
Wait, what happened? What?
I mean, I was saying it's probably somebody that took his iPad and chemistry.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's
that's
like
right.
Okay, guys, so let's get back onto this. Okay, so I talked about all the stuff that could make you unclean, all the sins that we commit, and so it's a lot there, and so you know that even if you offered these sacrifices and you're trying to be careful to do all that God wanted you to do, could you miss in your sacrifices some sins? Could you miss some things that you should have offered a sacrifice for that you didn't, right? Could there be sins that you committed that unintentionally or intentionally that you're not aware of or that you don't remember? Now think of during the course of a year, right? How many sins that we commit, or how many times there's, if we lived back during this time and we're under this covenant, if we had uncleannesses that would take place, or whatever the case may be. And that's why you have Leviticus 16, 17. You have a once a year Day of Atonement that covers everything else and resets the whole system. And so you have to understand that Day of Atonement really to understand books like the book of Hebrews, to understand what Jesus did and the nature of his sacrifice. Because the argument of Hebrews will not be that Jesus went into the temple, because Jesus was not a Levitical priest. He's not from the tribe of Aaron, but he went into heaven after his sacrifice on the cross. And we even talked about last time, Isaiah 53:10. Isaiah refers to the Messiah offering himself to God as a guilt offering, right? So he's making satisfaction for sin, not offering an animal, but offering himself. And so that's why that Day of Atonement has come to an end. Now the last kind of point I want to emphasize on Leviticus is this aspect of covenant. Okay, because this is important. Leviticus sets a trajectory for the future. The whole book takes place probably over about a month. Okay, it doesn't really advance the narrative, but basically, it's God has given His instructions now. There is sacrifice, there are laws, there are rules before God gives His law. Right? Noah makes sacrifices. Abel makes a sacrifice. Abraham makes sacrifices and altars. But now this is formalized. God gives his rules of worship, what it takes for a sinful people to commune with a holy God. That there has to be atonement for sin, that they have to do it according to God's way, that they have to treat God as holy, that they have to be holy. And so there's all these things. And so the law, though, is not just static. It doesn't just stay in its time. It has effects on the future. Okay, so here's some things to write down. Make sure you get this. You don't have to write down the whole verse, but the reference, Leviticus 26, 3 and 4. Okay, and so here are the results for either obedience to this law and keeping of this law, or disobedience to this law. Okay? And all this stuff will come true either way. Okay, so here's the challenge. Leviticus 26, verses 3 and 4, it starts with the word if, okay? And then verse 4 starts with the word then, okay? So what does it mean when you have an if-then statement? You have if, fill in the blank, then, fill in the blank. What does that mean? Yeah.
Well, it's a conditional statement, so whatever you're saying will happen can only happen if something else happens.
Right. It's conditional. There are requirements for certain other things, okay? Now remember, the Abrahamic covenant is a covenant of promise. Abraham does not have to do anything to keep it. God says, I'm going to give you land, I'm going to give you seed, make you a nation, and I'm going to give you blessing, and in your seed, all the nations of the world, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you. That promise is made. The covenant in Genesis 15 is even made when Abraham is asleep. So that promise is going to happen. Abraham doesn't make it happen, God makes it happen. But the Mosaic covenant, or the Sinaitic covenant, the law covenant, it's administrative. It gives conditions on basically what's going to allow Israel to kind of have the keys to the car, to be able to use the car. The car belongs to them, but whether or not they have the keys is conditional. Okay? So if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments so to carry them out, then I will give you. If you do this, then I will do that. So the question now is, we know that the promise to Abraham is unconditional, but the law is conditional. So how can Israel be a blessing to all their nations from their land and be a mighty nation if they're cursed and kicked out of the land because they don't keep the law? Okay? It's also, the law is not, it gives guarantees of certain results, but it doesn't guarantee that that you're going to make it. Okay? Have you guys been on an airplane before?
Yeah.
Okay? You know when the flight attendants give the instructions on how to put on a seatbelt, and if the plane crashes, you do this, and if we land in water, there's a flotation device, and if these things happen. Just because they give you the instructions does not mean that if the plane crashes that you'll get out alive. Okay, you guys know that, right? Just because you have the instructions on how to put on a seatbelt, that doesn't mean that the instructions will save you. Okay, so that's kind of how the law works as well. And so the positive potential of the law is over here on the left. That if you keep my statutes, if you obey my commandments, then I will give you, as over here, productivity, peace, power, population, provision, and then ultimately God's presence. That God will be with them, walk among them in the way that he is with nobody else, kind of like he was with Adam and Eve in the garden. Okay? And so they'll be economically prosperous, they'll be productive in the land, they will be able to outgrow their immediate needs, which is a big deal. Most of human history, people have lived on the edge of starvation, just trying to get enough calories to survive. And so productivity is a big deal, to be able to survive and have more than you need. We're used to that now. We live in a time of prosperity and an era of prosperity, but that wasn't normal for most people throughout thousands of years of human history. They'll also have peace. They'll also have rest from their enemies. Okay, so that's a big deal. This is what David kind of provides. This is what Solomon kind of provides, but it's not total because they don't obey consistently. Okay, so they'll have peace and rest, sounding like God rested, and also sounding like Noah, the Noahic covenant, bringing rest. So it's like, okay, can God restore rest to creation? Well, this is saying, okay, well, this is one of the ways that he will do that. They'll also have power. They'll be said to be the head of the nations, not the tail. Okay, so they will be God's great nation. They'll be seen as great among the other nations, and the nations are supposed to look to them and learn about God. They're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. They'll also grow in population. The women who give birth will not miscarry, and so they will, which also millions of people throughout human history have died in infancy and childbirth, right? And most children, infant mortality was very high through most of human history as well. So again, having a population survive is a big deal. Okay, provision be provided for. Okay, and then all of this centers around God's presence. God says, "I will be their God; they will be my people. I will walk among them," which Paul quotes in 1 Corinthians 6:16 when he says that you are the temple, that God will dwell among you. That should be true of us now in Christ. Okay, so that's the positive side. But there's also the negative side. And the negative, God is going to be faithful either way. He'll be faithful when they obey. He'll be faithful to do what he said when they disobey. So the consequences, you guys know consequences are not always bad, right? Consequences are just the result of doing something, right? So I could have positive consequences, like if I work hard at something and it works out, that's a positive consequence. I could have negative consequences if I'm not paying attention and something goes badly, right? So the other side is also true. If they disobey God, they'll have debilitation and defeat. Their enemies will defeat them. They will not be productive. They will have drought. Okay? God will not allow rain on the land, which to us, we're used to just turning on the tap and having water. But if you're living in an agricultural society in the desert and you don't have rain, that's a matter of survival. Okay, so there will also be sick. God talks about bringing on them consumption and disease. Okay, and then also it says this kind of sounds, again, foreign to us, but devastation by wild beasts. He says, I'll send in wild animals and they'll eat your children and they'll kill you. And now to us, we're not really around that so much. I mean, we do have, kind of some bears and bobcats and things like that out here. But if you really faced like a lion, or a bear, it's kind of hard to, deal with that type of animal, right? But remember, Adam in the garden has dominion over what? Over the animals. So yeah, he's saying, so if you disobey God, the animals are going to turn on you. They're going to have dominion over you. They'll also have deprivation by siege. Siege warfare is like when other nations surround you. They don't allow you to have any like trade or anything that allows you to get food or water. And then they just block everything off, and then they just wait. And they wait to basically starve the population into subservience. And this will happen to Israel. Deuteronomy will talk about this, Leviticus talks about this, and then Jeremiah will say this is what is basically happening now or going to happen in the near future, is that they'll get so desperate that they'll turn to cannibalism. They'll eat a woman will give birth to a child and try to eat it. Stuff like this. So he's saying like people will get so desperate, surrounded by armies, that they will be starving to death, not have water, get diseases, stuff like this, and then eventually deportation. That's God's kind of like final consequence for Israel's disobedience. This is the big punishment. And what does deportation mean? What does it mean if Israel gets deported, or anyone gets deported from the land? Yeah.
Gets kicked out?
Yeah, it means getting kicked out of the land. Yeah. It's also referred to as going into exile. God will bring their enemies on them. God will use even unbelievers to come in, discipline Israel, and kick them out of the land. Now, that doesn't mean that every single Israelite is disobedient either. There will be people like Jeremiah, like Daniel, like Ezekiel, like Isaiah, and their groups. There will be people who will obey God and love God and follow God and warn the people against their sin and idolatry, but they're going to have to suffer the consequences because their whole nation is basically sinning. Their leadership is sinning. And now they're going to get kicked out of the land as well. Think of somebody like Daniel and his friends. They basically have to suffer the consequences for the sin of their nation. And so Moses will re-emphasize these points and elaborate on them in Deuteronomy 27 and 28, where he will talk about the blessings and the curses. And he'll actually have different people stand on different mountains and have them basically sing a song or a chant where they recite the blessings and curses of God. Now, let me just ask you guys to make a guess here. Which section does Moses spend more time talking about in Deuteronomy? Which one gets more attention? The blessings or the curses?
Curses.
The curses, correct. Why do you think Moses spends more time talking about the curses of the law? Yeah, what do you think?
So that people don't want to disobey? Because it shows it's more emphasized on the what will happen to them if they do not obey.
Right, so it shows the consequences of disobedience. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, this could just be like totally wrong, but maybe because we sin more than we don't sin.
Okay.
So then maybe because, focusing on what they do the most.
Yeah. Basically, yeah, that's it. Is Moses knows that the people generally are not going to obey God. So he says, look, yeah, you can have the blessings. They're there for you to get. And he's going to say in Deuteronomy, he's going to say the law is not that unreasonable. The word is right there, and it's not like it's across the sea, like you have to go do this really hard thing. You're just being asked to obey God. But he says, you're not going to do it. And so he said, what we're really going to focus on is talking about the negatives. talking about the consequences for sin, because that's what you're going to do. And so he spends more time talking about the curses. And so this creates a big problem for the Old Testament. Is Israel has these promises that are unconditional from Abraham, but the promises can't be fulfilled if Israel is under curse and kicked out of the land, right? So Israel is supposed to be a blessing to all the nations, but they can't do it, right? Because they don't keep the law. They're supposed to be in their land, but they can't do it because they don't keep the law. So basically, the curse of the law has to be dealt with, and that's what Jesus does. Is Jesus fulfills the law and underdoes the curse of the law. Okay. Now looking here at we saw. Actually, I want to skip ahead to. Where is that verse that I wanted to find? Yes, okay. Now, here is the problem. So the law of God is not going to produce the results in a good way. It's not going to be able to produce the results, okay? That doesn't mean that something's wrong with the law of God. It's that something's wrong with what? Sophia?
Their hearts.
Their hearts, yeah. It's that it's not that the law of God is wrong, it's that we sin and that the heart is wrong. Okay, so remember Genesis 6:5 talks about Moses evaluates the world at the time of the flood and talks about that sin is not just bad things people do, but that sin is in the heart. He says that that God looked and saw that the hearts of men were only evil continually. Now the problem is Noah, even though Noah's a righteous man, even though he has faith, he builds the ark and God saves him. Noah and his family bring into the ark human nature with them. And what do they take out of the ark with them? What's the problem that still exists in the world? Sin, yeah. They still have a sinful heart. They still have a sinful nature. And God says in, I believe, Genesis 8:11, he says that man's heart is evil from his youth. And so then we read about in Exodus that Pharaoh has a hard heart and God hardens Pharaoh's heart, meaning Pharaoh's heart responds negatively no matter what God does. And that's the natural response of a sinful heart. But Israel also has a problem in their heart. Okay, you know Israel is supposed to be, the males are supposed to be circumcised, right? This is a sign of the covenant. But God says, while that is what the law commands, that's not good enough. Because that's just something that's a sign on your body. He says what you really need is what?
A sign of faith?
Well, it is a sign of faith, but it's not an external change or circumcision, but a what?
Internal.
Yeah. Internal. Yeah, you need not a circumcised body, but a circumcised heart. Okay. Now the problem is, so what God says is basically your heart needs to be cut open, cleansed, and changed. But can Israel do this, provide this for themselves? Can they change their own hearts? No. And this is going to sound a little bit strange too, but does the law provide for them a heart that loves God and keeps the law? Does the law give them that?
Yes, sort of.
No. Well, no. I mean, it gives them what they should do, but they don't.
It gives them the commands, right?
But they don't follow it.
And it does tell them, don't covet. It does go after the heart. It does tell them that you should keep these laws from the heart, and the central command of the law is going to be to love God with all your heart. but the law does not actually provide what is necessary to keep the law. Now, it sounds strange, but the law doesn't promise to do that. Okay, so sinners are not going to keep the law of God. So look at Leviticus 26, 41 and 42. God gives another conditional statement. He says, if their uncircumcised heart, okay, their heart that's still sinful, becomes humble, so that they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant. So God basically says, if their heart changes, they repent, they turn to me, I will remember my covenant. But the issue is, this is going to be impossible for them to do for themselves. Moses will preach in Deuteronomy 5:29, and he will say, oh, that they had such a, this is God speaking, he says, oh, that they had such a heart that they would fear me and keep my commandments always, that it may be well with them and their sons forever. So Moses is saying, or God is saying through Moses, I wish that Israel had this heart in them that would actually want to obey me, love me, and keep my commandments. But what is God saying there? Do they have that or not?
No.
They don't. And so Moses preaches to the people and tells them to do something that's actually impossible for them to do. He says in Deuteronomy 10:16, he says, so circumcise your heart. This is like saying, perform open heart surgery on yourself. Okay? Can you guys do that? Or, no. You can't replace and take out your own heart and put in another heart. But Moses is actually saying something that's even more difficult, is that you and I cannot, as sinners, change our own heart. Right? You can't. It would be more likely that you could actually take out your heart and put in a new one than to actually change it from one that does not love God, does not want to obey God, to one that does want to love and obey God. And then at the end of Deuteronomy 29, when Moses is preaching, he says, yet to this day the Lord has not given you a heart to know, nor eyes to see, nor ears to hear. So he says you don't have the heart to keep the law, because why? According to Deuteronomy 29:4. You don't have it because what? Yep.
The Lord hasn't given it.
Yeah. You don't have it because God hasn't given it to you, and that's not what the law promised to provide. Okay? So now the law has a problem. God's law is perfect. God's law could get the job done, but it does not provide the heart for a sinner to keep the law of God. Therefore, when you apply the law of God to a sinner, they will always fail. Okay? So what basically can you guys infer, and this will get us into Deuteronomy at another point, but can you guys infer, kind of guess ahead, what is it going to, what is salvation really going to take? What does God basically, what needs to happen that needs to be provided, that the old covenant and the law does not provide? So you can't obey because you don't have a heart, so therefore, what do you need? Yeah.
You need a circumcised heart.
Yeah, you need a circumcised heart. You need a new heart. And that's where Moses, where he'll go, and he'll say, God will have to do this himself. This is what will cause people to repent. As he says in Deuteronomy 36, the Lord will circumcise your heart. But they don't know that answer yet. Okay, so I'm giving it to you guys ahead of time, but they don't know that yet. So Moses, you guys know Deuteronomy 29. There's a famous verse that people, I think, kind of misunderstand from Deuteronomy 29. Moses says, Moses sums up his sermon by basically saying, okay, I've given you all the law, the blessings, the curses, you're going to fail. And he says, here's basically the problem. You don't have a heart to keep the law because God hasn't given it to you. You're going to have a problem of that individuals are going to disobey and the group is going to disobey, and those are going to have consequences. And number 3, you're going to have the problem of you're going to be cursed, but you're supposed to be a blessing to all the nations. And then Moses ends that section with Deuteronomy 29:29, where it's like, Israel's like, well, how is this all going to work then? And Moses ends by saying, the secret things belong to the Lord. Okay, so sometimes people think that that's, and it can be, a statement of just, oh, comfort, like God knows better than we know. But what Moses is saying is that only God knows what he's going to do to make this right, to make this whole thing work. Okay, so basically God has to provide a new heart. Okay, so that's what has to happen in the new covenant. Okay, all right, let me look at a few other points here. You guys don't have to worry about this. You just take a look at it. Okay, we talked about this, that the covenant, not because there's anything wrong with the law, but that the covenant will have a built-in failure. Okay, and so we looked at that. Okay. Yeah, we'll end that there. So that's basically the covenant. You don't have to write this down, but this is the covenant that Leviticus ends with, Leviticus 26. And then it does provide some more commands in Leviticus 27 about how you value certain things and some other laws and things that go into that. Okay, now the next book that we're going to pick up with tomorrow is the book of Numbers. Now the story is going to advance forward. Okay, how long has Israel been at Mount Sinai? So they do the Exodus. Okay, and they go to meet God at the mountain. God gives them the law. They do the golden calf, all this stuff. They've been camping there for a while. About how long have they been there? You guys know?
Isn't it 40 years?
Not 40 years. That hasn't happened yet. That will be what Numbers refers to. But how long have they just been at the mountain after the Exodus?
Oh,
Probably 40.
It's about a year. They've been there about a year. I think I read somewhere 377 days. Okay, so they get there, they meet God, they get the law, they get the covenant, they break the covenant, then they get Leviticus. Nadab and Abihu die. There's a few things that happen that advance the narrative in Leviticus. Now they have the instructions. And then Numbers is basically going to be how to, they have to learn some other things about how to survive with God and each other in the wilderness, how to treat God, putting God at their center. They have to count up the people. And their goal is they're supposed to go into the land, but they're not going to, because they're not going to believe God and obey God. So this book is that they die. They die in the wilderness. And tomorrow we'll look at some New Testament references that refer to the book of Numbers that point back to the book of Numbers as warning. But also there's some hope from the book of Numbers as well, because I'll just end on this. Israel's in the wilderness for 40 years. Do you guys know why that number 40, why God says 40 years? Why that number in particular? Okay, well, obviously he's waiting for that generation. Everybody's 20 and up to die. That's one reason. But also, do you guys, how many days did the 12 spies go into the land of Canaan, including Joshua and Caleb, to spy out the land before they came back? And then 10 of them gave Israel a bad report and they didn't want to go in. How many days did they go into the land for?
I'm just going to say 40.
40? Yep, that's right. Yeah. Numbers 14:34, they say, okay, it'd be better that we die in the wilderness, and God says, okay, go ahead. I'll give you what you want. And then they say, no, we'll go in. And then God says, no, I'm not going to go with you. And so he says, I'm going to give you 1 year for every day of that represented those 40 days. Okay, but who also spends 40 days in the wilderness, but unlike Israel, doesn't test God, doesn't disobey God, comes out of the wilderness alive. Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, right? And while Jesus is in the wilderness, bearing like Moses, like David, like Israel, he is bearing the weight of those guys and their promises on his shoulders. But Jesus is asked to test God. Jesus is asked to go to complain, to go around God's promise of provision, to make bread. Jesus is asked to worship falsely. And Jesus quotes the book of Deuteronomy each time, saying that he will not do that. He will obey God in accordance with the scriptures. So Israel fails in the wilderness, dies, and that's the wilderness is the place of their unbelief. What Matthew and Luke pick up on is when Jesus goes into the wilderness and is tempted, that Jesus actually that he succeeds, that he does not fail, and so he can actually achieve what Israel failed to do. Okay, so that's just one highlight of what we'll look at tomorrow as we get into the book of Numbers. But we'll